I'm here today with Stephen Adjei, who is a British Ghanaian author, poet, healthcare consultant, and entrepreneur. He's the founding partner of Blue Cloud Health, a UK based, African focused healthcare firm that exists to provide solutions to health businesses in sub Saharan Africa. And he's an award winning consultant pharmacist. And he's also the author of Pay the Price, creating ethical entrepreneurial success through passion, pain, and purpose. So, first of all, welcome, Stephen. It's really, really good to have you here.
Thank you so much, Alison. I'm really privileged to be here today.
Well, we're privileged to have you. And first, I want to start with that. You've sort of gone against all conventional wisdom, and I love it in your title because you use words that you aren't supposed to use in a title. You use words like paying price and pain and all that kind of stuff. So tell me, where are you coming from?
Obviously, I've read a lot of books on entrepreneurship, and the entrepreneurship I know personally, and with the other people I know, there seems to be a disparity between the two. So most books talk about the formula, isn't it? You have your passion, you have your purpose, and you do this and that and that and that, and that comes out at the end, But my experience wasn't like that, and a lot of people that I spoke to didn't have the same experience. And I think, like you said, a lot of writers tend to shy away from the gritty parts of it, the pain parts, the price part. I thought, why not? I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna be the first person to go for it. So I did. I thought I wanted to tell a real story of what people should expect, because it sounds cheesy, but I always get a sense of sadness whenever I see a business fail. I feel personally sad, and I was so close to failure, and I know exactly how it feels like. So I wanted to get out a real story, and that's why I used the title.
I'm imagining a lot of people resonate with that as well because we don't talk about it, and we certainly don't celebrate it. Oh, that's the wrong word, but you know what I mean. We don't acknowledge it, the centrality of that kind of pain. And you talk about different kinds of pain. Tell us your taxonomy of pain.
So I realized that we all feel pain, and the feeling is the same. Okay, but I bet like you, listen. I journaled a lot. I did a lot of journaling through the hard times, which I'm sure I'll talk about later. We'll talk about when it comes to writing. But I did a lot of writing when I was going through pain, and I was going through my journals over the last 2 or 3 years, and I realized that the pain came from 4 different sources, and so I color coded them. So I have what you call red flag pain, okay, and I coded them using the traffic light system, which is easier to remember. So when you're driving, Alison, and you get to a red flag, a red light, you just stop, don't you? So I call the red flag pain the pain of self-sabotage, okay? And I'll be honest, I think it's good to be honest and transparent. My pain was pornography. So anytime I went through a bad patch, and I went through several bad patches, I just went to pornography as a source of relief. But I realized that over the time I was doing it, my performance as an entrepreneur was getting worse and worse. My marriage was declining. I was becoming more of a worse person. And I felt that pain, but that pain was coming from a red flag, which was, in my case, pornography. I've spoken to hundreds of entrepreneurs over the years, and some of them have different ones. Some of gambling, alcoholism, and procrastination, all sorts. So that's where you call red flag pain. And the antidote to that is just to stop. Okay, obviously, to summarize,
Quite simple.
yeah, quite summarize it. Obviously, I talk about more about stopping in the book,
Yeah,
but it comes down to stopping. The second pain is amber flag pain. So amber flag pain is when you're driving and you get to a traffic light and it's amber. It means you have to wait. Okay, and that pain comes from waiting. Okay, sometimes things that you have to wait for is outside your control. Okay, I had this funny thing from a friend of mine in Africa who said that if you go around impregnating 6 women, it'll still take 9 months for the baby to come out each side. You can't. It doesn't get it quicker if you yeah. I know it's quite crude.
a lot more complicated, but no quicker.
I know that's quite crude, but it made quite a simple point. Some things take time, and no matter how you try to rush the process or force the process, there's always a waiting period, and many of us fail because we can't wait long enough. I was listening to Stephen Bartlett the other day, and he was saying that sometimes, and in most cases, it's a 10-year waiting period to really see proper success, lasting success. It can take up to 10 years. And many entrepreneurs quit after the third, fourth, fifth year because they feel like they're not getting success. The third pain is what I call white flag pain. And white flag pain is the pain of surrender. Okay, so in my case, for instance, I have epilepsy. Okay, I have really bad epilepsy. and I get fits quite often.
Often when you're driving, I was
When I'm driving, I've had fits when I'm driving. Obviously, I can't drive now because of that. I've had fits.
reading in the book, and I was thinking, oh,
I've had fits in the bath. Actually, the funny thing is, my book, Pay the Price, came out of a fit. I mean, I was
yeah,
upstairs and I had a massive fit, fell down the stairs, really injured myself. And I've had to surrender. I've been to a hospital. They've done all sorts of tests. They've done all sorts of everything. And I still have the fits. And so I came that pain comes from something that you cannot control, something that's outside your control. And that's what I call the white flag pain. I call it white flag because you have to surrender, and that comes in various ways. You can be a woman, for instance, in a male-dominated area. Okay, now you need to accept the fact that, of course, you win the war, of course, you win the battle, you will win eventually, but it comes from accepting the fact that you're a woman, or many other things. Maybe if you're an African, it comes from accepting the fact that you're African. So some things will take longer, So some things in life are not your faults, and it comes from accepting that there's no your faults. Life is unfair, and then you have to move on with where you go. And then the last pain I talk about is the green flag pain. Now, green flag pain comes from what people tell you or what you tell yourself. Okay. So people may say, you're not good at what you're doing. This plan will never work. It's rubbish. It will never work. And you tend to believe it, and that causes pain. Okay. Sometimes the pain comes because the people that are telling you that this won't work could be your spouse, it could be your best friend, it could be your coach, and that causes pain. And you go about with self doubts, thinking, oh, this is never going to work. You feel pain because somebody said it's not going to work. But I call it green because you shouldn't listen to that pain. You keep going.
yeah.
So these are the four sources of pain that we all face. And our success as entrepreneurs or business owners largely depends on how we respond to that kind of pain.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because, of course, I recognise, and I'm sure everybody listening will recognise every one of those kinds of pain. I'm not sure that all of us have been quite so thoughtful about classifying them and about noticing how actually the response to the different kinds needs to be different,
Yes.
because they just all feel very unpleasant.
Exactly,
Actually, they're really qualitatively different.
exactly. And I think the more complex thing is sometimes they're intertwined. I talk about an instance where somebody said something that was really hurtful to me. Once I came home that day feeling very, very upset. Obviously, because I was so upset, my brain went into reverse gear. And then obviously I end up in red flag pain, me going into the pornography. And then because I went into the pornography, the next day I had a call. I didn't sleep well. I missed that call, which obviously went into amber flag pain. I had to wait longer. So these things sometimes they spiral.
Yeah.
If you're not careful to
They come in combination.
exactly, if you don't take them, if you don't, and you talk about this in your book, Alison, but sometimes sitting down and writing things out makes you realize this is what I faced, this is what happened to me, and that's why I'm doing this. And until you sit
Yeah.
down and self-reflect and actually write it down, it's very difficult, and you go around like a headless chicken trying to
Yeah.
put out the fires. Whereas,
Well, I now have a new prompt, Stephen. I'm going to be asking myself, what color pain is this?
yes,
When something's happening. I think it's a really, yeah, it's a thoughtful way of looking at it,
yes,
isn't it?
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes, absolutely,
What quality of pain?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And you also, I think, very helpfully classify or sort of break down the different types of entrepreneurship. And I just love, I want to talk to you about writing because there's so much to talk about actually the way you've done the book. But just before we do that, just give us your sort of theory of entrepreneurship.
Okay, so for me, I think I mean, Simon Sinek, and I'm not someone to challenge Simon Sinek. He's a very popular writer, but I think starting from who is crucial. You need to start from who you are as a person, because I said in the book that if you have a bad apple tree, you can never have good fruits. Okay, so for me to be an entrepreneur or an ethical one, which we all should aspire to be, is five things that we need to look out for, and any of all those five things together will make you an ethical entrepreneur. Okay, so the first thing I talk about is stewardship. Okay, stewardship means that there comes a time in your life where you have to hand over a baton. Okay, so if you start a business or you start a movement, that doesn't go on forever, and it means distancing yourself as a human being from what you've done. And it comes to a time where I mean, you probably read about the former Disney boss who went back, retired, went back because he thought, there comes a time where you've expired, basically, to put it quite crudely. And a lot of entrepreneurs don't do this very well. And this is where I have a lot of praise for women leaders. You've seen this in Nicola Sturgeon, in New Zealand, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, who they know that, right, I've come to the end of my thing. I need to pass over the button. And a lot of entrepreneurs don't get this, and they don't steward it properly, and then they run into problems. The second thing is your identity. Okay, so again, it comes down to the same thing. You should know who you are, what makes you tick, and realize that your identity is not tied to the business. They are two separate things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the third thing is also purpose, which Simon Sinek talks about in his book. Start with why. Why are you doing this? What is the purpose behind what you're doing? And the fourth thing I talk about is the trail. So the trail basically is what are you leaving behind you when you're doing your job? Okay, and I break it down into compassion and competence. Okay, so your trail should be compassionate. You should be good to the people you're working with, good to your customers, good to your clients, but also you should be competent. And many of us err on one side. Some people are too competent and they don't have any compassion, and some people are too compassionate and don't have any competence. So the trail means that when you look behind you, you should have that trail. And that actually came to me when I had a fit and I fell down the stairs. When I look back, I could see a trail of disaster. And that's a lot of entrepreneurs. Wherever they go, when you look behind them, it's just chaos, disaster, broken relationships. And that is one thing that we should not do as entrepreneurs. And the final thing I talk about is stickability, which means you should. Angela Duckworth, she talked about grit. You need to commit, and you need to persevere. So these five things are things which I think, as an entrepreneur, as an ethical entrepreneur, you should have. And if you don't have these five things, you're bound to fail at some point. And all failures of identity of an entrepreneurship come from one of these five things.
Yeah, it's brilliant, and I particularly love competence and compassion as being yoked together,
Yes.
and a balance.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, they're not mutually exclusive in any way, but that sense that actually one without the other is pretty useless, really,
Absolutely.
if you're going to be an entrepreneur who's actually going to make a
Absolutely.
difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
One of the things that really strikes anybody reading your book is, I mean, you start with some of your own poetry, and there's a Spotify playlist that accompanies it. And I'm really interested in the way that you have enriched what can be quite a dry form, the business book. I mean, I love business books,
Yes.
but
Yes. Yes.
let's face it, an awful lot of them are pretty dry.
Yes.
And you've brought in poetry, which, if anybody was to draw a sort of graph of types of writing, they'd probably be on completely opposite ends of any sort of spectrum.
Yes.
And you've brought in that idea about the Spotify playlist that sort of, that accompanies it. I mean, you are a poet, obviously, as well as an entrepreneur and an author, but where did that come from, and why did you think it was important?
Yeah, I got the idea because I realized that two things. So the first thing, it was I tend to music, and all of us do, don't we? When we are going through troubled times, we'll have our favorite artist that we listen to, and also music has the ability to transport you into time. So when I listen to a particular kind of music, it takes me back to where I was. So it means that when you listen to music, it has the effects that sometimes words don't have. So when you write a book and there's the music to go with it, and you listen to that music, that instantly transports you to the point where you're reading the book, or to where you were. Okay, now my favorite band is a band called Switchfoot, and they played a song called Vice Verses. Okay, now Vice Verses basically means that your vice is your verse. The weak parts of you are also the good parts of you. And for me, my vices were literally my verses. So the bad parts of me is what prompted me to write the book. So every time I hear vice verses anywhere played, anywhere on the radio or in the car or wherever I am, it instantly transports me to that thing. So music has that it's able to take you to places where just words can't do. There's an emotional component, and actually you talk about that in your book quite well, Alison. I mean, about the chimp, the human, the chimp. Yeah. So music has that ability to transport you to a place where just words can't. So I thought that if people listen to the music and they read the book at the same time, that they're able to be transported to a place which just the book cannot do. And that's why and same with the poetry. Somehow that's why I put them all together.
I mean, personally, I can't do it. I tried. I did try listening to this playlist while reading the book, but I can't listen to music with words as I read. I just,
No, 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 no,
my
no,
brain,
no,
it can't do it,
no,
which
no,
is
no.
such a shame. But I did listen to the playlist separately, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, 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 yeah. The intent was not to listen to them together, but the intent was when you have the playlist, and I mean, some of the not all the music is to everyone's taste, but the intent is for you to build your playlist yourself, your own playlist, personal to you.
Yeah.
I recently came out from an NHS training yesterday, or I think the day before, where they used Brené Brown's book Dare to Lead.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know that book obviously, and they used that for training for NHS staff, and they were all encouraged to build their own playlists. What spoke to them about leadership, and there were quite a few interesting songs that people put in there. People put "I Want to Break Free" by Queen. I think it's by Queen,
Mm.
and all sorts of music that to them symbolized the kind of leadership that they want to do. And so I expect anytime that person listens to "I Want to Break Free," that will remind them of the training, and that automatically reminds them of everything they've been taught. It's a very quick
Thank
way.
you. Yeah, I love that because what it's doing is it's tapping into a very emotional part of you, which words are quite a sort of late development for our brains, aren't they? Whereas music is a much more foundational piece. It's also you can personalize it so much more. So yes, you've given us your playlist and it's great, but actually that sense that if you can almost lock an idea to a song and then that takes you to, that's a really interesting way of looking at it.
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
the poetry, um, I guess, well, I've got so much to ask you about this, but I'm framing a question. I think it's something
Okay.
about how does being a poet change how you write when you're writing prose and particularly business books?
Yes, this is a very interesting question, and I had a lot of problems with my editor about this because he was always complaining to me that Stephen, how am I going to edit this? And the guy who and my word proof when I took it for publishing, they were continually complaining because they couldn't edit. When it comes to poetry, it is what it is. You can't edit it, you can't change it. So for me, I thought again, it comes down to the creativity part of it, which I think, which you said in your book again, is trying to unlock the part of your brain that you don't engage when you're reading a business book. So my favorite poet is Irisa Daily Ward, and she a book of poems is called Bone. And for Red Flag Pain, for instance, she spoke about the name of the poem is very interesting. It says things that I can't remember the actual title, but it says 20 things that over time it takes a bad liver to work out, something like that. And she said something interesting that the person that hates themselves will always be you. And that's what she said. And it's a book I'll highly recommend if you, I mean, if you even if you're not into poetry, because for me it broke down Red Flag Pain for me to understand. And he said that it talks about the trap in your eye and the word in your mouth. The trap in your eye is what you see, isn't it? So when you see something, it's a trap. In my case, that resonated with me because with pornography, it's what you see and that traps you, isn't it? So she said the thing that will always destroy you is the trap in your eye, the red in your eye, and the trap in your mouth. A lot of us, the red flag pain is what we say. You see things that you regret. You hear things that you regret. So again, the poetry, from my point of view, is able to bring an imaginative part of your brain which you don't really engage. And my goal was to get people to engage with the book in a different way than just reading facts and figures and statistics and stuff like that. You want to get people to engage with the book in a visceral way, inside you, so that you can carry with you. And not, I just give that example in my book, but I want to encourage all people, entrepreneurs, business people, whether they're writing articles or whether they're writing anything at all, to try and bring that
Yeah.
into play. I mean, I write a newsletter which goes out to over 1,000 people, and all my newsletters that I send out, there's always a striking art, and that grabs you. I mean, I did one last week called "The Dark Side," which is on LinkedIn, which I sent to her, and I met this fascinating artist in New Delhi, in India, and that's her theme, the dark side. And so the newsletter I did was a figure of a lovely young girl on one side. So it's a face, but it's a lovely one girl on one face, and the other side is an old, wrinkly, ugly man together. And when you see the picture, is the dark side. So it means that woman, that lady has a dark side, and that automatically resonates. So it's a matter of getting people to viscerally understand and move where you go rather than just words on a page.
Yes, there's that visceral dimension, the emotional connection. And there's also something about the way that you, as a poet, I think, are aware of the effect that you can have with words.
Yes.
And there's the way that words can create visual pictures that as you say, are much more striking and memorable than simply
Absolutely,
putting facts down on the page.
absolutely, absolutely,
It's really interesting when you read it.
absolutely.
One of the other things that I particularly noticed about the book, and it's so refreshing, is that you use lots of stories from Africa. Of
Yes,
course you do. You know, you
yes,
work a lot in Ghana and elsewhere. But it
yeah.
really struck me that I don't remember the last time I read an African case study or a story from sub-Saharan Africa in a business book. So tell me a little bit more about that, why it matters, why we need these, and how it felt putting them into a book.
Yeah, so obviously being British and African, Africa is the most entrepreneurial continent in the world. I don't know
Yeah.
where people know this. So 27% of women are entrepreneurs in Africa. Huge entrepreneurial continents. And the reason why people are entrepreneurial is because there are so many hardships and people have found ways to circumvent
Mm.
the traditional way of doing things. I'll give an example. So I was a keynote speaker at a conference in London, I think last month, and I met a really interesting guy called George Blay, who is the marketing manager of a company called Zipline. Now, so George Blay is Ghanaian, and one day they were thinking to themselves, now the roads in Ghana, and as in most African countries, are quite bad, especially in the rural areas. So people die because we cannot get the supplies to them quick enough.
Yeah.
Okay, so somebody needs blood. Okay, now there's lots of blood in say the capital, which is Accra or in Lagos or Abuja or whichever capital you're talking about. Somebody's in a rural area and they need blood. Now the roads are so bad, there's no helicopters or traffic or planes. So getting the blood to them, by the time the blood gets to them, they're dead, basically. So these guys sat together and thought, why can't we use drones? Now how that came to their mind, it's fascinating. So they figured out a way where they could use drones, and so now what they do is the drone picks up the blood from the central depot in Accra, and it can fly the blood to any place within the continent in half an hour. And that comes about because of the hardships of the place.
Mm.
People find way, and I can give you several examples. I talk about several examples in the book.
Yeah,
And
and particularly the one about the COVID response in Africa was fascinating. I'd never heard of it. But it's
yeah,
an
exactly,
amazing
exactly.
example of sort of international collaboration.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And we never hear about this. I mean, now, and even the Caribbean countries joined. It was fascinating how it was done, and what that was done within 3 weeks. And obviously, that it never makes the news. I mean, but that collaboration, and people say that Africa will largely got away with COVID. It wasn't as bad as it was in Europe or in America. And people say, oh, it's because the weather was hot, or was because um, um, there's not enough international travel. But Africans were fuming because people went through a lot of things, and that was an example. The collaboration was phenomenal.
I'm just thinking of after the Y2K thing when nothing happened and everybody went, oh, well, it wasn't so bad. And all the programmers were like, do you know why it didn't go wrong? Because we spent so
Exactly.
much
So
time making sure it didn't
exactly.
go
So
wrong. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So Africans put in a lot of efforts and a
Yeah.
lot of work to make sure that, because Africans knew that if COVID gets to the continent, people are going to die in droves. Okay, so they put in very strict and a lot of measures. An example is what I
Mm.
gave in the book about the collaboration
Yeah.
to make sure that the COVID doesn't get to those countries. And obviously, that's why Africa got spared. Obviously, there are other factors as well. I mean, the lack of international travel, it's not so connected to the world. Those are all true.
But it's
Africa,
such a brilliant story and such a great example. And reading it, I just thought this is a massive blind spot for people in the West reading business books, isn't it? We just don't hear enough of these stories. We don't have this perspective. We need to fix this.
no, no, absolutely, I agree. Absolutely agree. And I just feel that because Africa has so much to teach us about entrepreneurship, about resilience. I mean, which is sometimes what we lack here in the West: resilience, innovation, thinking around problems, collaboration. What Africa lacks is the ability to bring those innovations into the mainstream. Okay, so you have a
Mm.
lot of these innovations that are on the fringe, but Africans lack, well, not Africans, the leaders lack the I would say the policy frameworks to bring these things into the mainstay. So you have a lot of these innovations, but they are all on the fringe. So the next challenge for Africa is to bring these actually so it works for the common man. But for innovations, brilliant. There's no shortage of them at all.
Yeah. Such a great point. I've got an eye on the time, Steve. We're going to have to start wrapping up, which I'm really cross about because I want to ask you so many more questions. But I wouldn't be forgiven if I didn't ask you what I ask every guest on the show, which is what's your one best tip for a first-time business book author?
Um, I thought about this, and I think it's for me, it's originality. There's so many books on so many stuff all over the world. That you need to find, and that's why for me, I went with that because it's hard out there to get your book out. It's so crowded, and there are top books on any and on many many topics. For me, for instance, because I got rejected by 20 different publishers, mainly because obviously the topic was entrepreneurship. I had no following. I have no
Mm.
following to speak of. I only just built a following, and sometimes as well, it's very rare to have a person of color write on a mainstream business book. People of color are known for writing about race or a Nobel, but for I think I'm probably the first British, as far as I know, to write a mainstream business book. That's actually chatting amazing. So those three things together makes it difficult as it is. So if it's like, we're coming out, it's not original, then it's difficult. So I think when you're writing a business book, find a niche where people are not talking about. People are like, for me, it's pain, for instance, and so the originality for me is crucial. You need to find something that's original that people are not talking about, which can stand out because it's so crowded out there, as you know, Alison.
Yeah. And not original for the sake of it. I think it's
Oh,
important to say, isn't it? It's got to be something that is really authentic to you. It's
exactly, exactly. Original and marketable. So I said it authentic, yeah. So for me, because I went through the pain, all four kinds of pain. I went bankrupt. I have epilepsy. I crashed two cars. So I had all that stuff. So I was able to write from, like you say, from authenticity. But I was just being brave enough to write about the fact that I struggled with pornography, or being brave enough to say that I had a fit in the bath and I broke my back. So it's having the bravery, I'll say, to write about these things
yeah,
as well.
yeah. And is there a book that you would recommend that everybody should read? What book has been particularly meaningful to you?
That's a good question as well. Sorry, Alison, but I have to talk about two books. I don't
You
swap.
won't be the first. I'm sure you won't be the last.
Now, the first book you mentioned in your book, Alison, which is Deep Work by Cal Newport. Absolutely fascinating. And I see this is quite meaningful to me because of the distractions, through your phone, TikTok. And I see sometimes my little girl scrolling through TikTok all the time. And
Yeah,
we are wiring our brains not to be able to concentrate on things. And so that book for me was revolutionary. The fact that you can block out everything. I'm writing my second book now, and that book has been revolutionary. I can block out everything, go for an hour to go, and just do deep work. And the second book as well is Factfulness by Hans Rosling. It's not particularly a business book, but I was blown away by how simple, that the fact that the world is getting better, and how you use simple statistics to prove that point. I've read it so many. I love the book, and those are the two main books I recommend. I'm sorry I couldn't use
the
more.
late great Hans Rosling. Yeah,
Yes, I
I
love.
remember watching his TED talk and just being
Yes,
absolutely blown away with what he could do with figures and visualizing data.
absolutely, absolutely. I love that book. Absolutely love it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation. Well, two great recommendations. Thank you. Fantastic. And Stephen, if people want to find out more about you, more about the work that you do, more about the books that you are writing, have written, where should they go?
So I've got a website, which is my name. So stephenadjei.com. I'm also quite very active, as you know, Alison, on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn and Twitter are my preferred, and well, on Facebook as well. So LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook are my preferred social media, but my website is stephenadjei.com. I also have a newsletter, which is free, comes up every 2 weeks, which is based on the principles of the book, which is free as well. And you get a second book as well when you subscribe, which is about
Brilliant.
free.
And I'll put those links up, as always, on the show notes at extraordinarybusinessbooks.com. But Stephen, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure talking to you today.
Wonderful. And thank you so much, Alison. It's been an absolute privilege. Thank you so much.